Hey everyone, Duke here, and today we're going over this week's Pantheon, Oryx Exalted. If you ran last week's Pantheon, there's going to be a lot of similar things, but there are going to be some changes. The first one is that we are going to be 10 underleveled for all of these encounters. We're also going to be on Solar Surge and Stasis Surge this week. This is actually also true of last week's Pantheon, Atrax Sovereign. If you didn't run it last week, it's also now Solar and Stasis, but again, we're focusing on Oryx, but Solar and Stasis for this week. And we do have a different modifier called Shot Caller. This is going to still be a 20% damage buff, but honestly, it is going to be a little bit trickier to get, especially for damage phases, but we will go over some specific times and ways to get this procced in the different encounters. In order to proc Shot Caller, you yourself individually are going to need to hit 3 precision shots on any enemies, and then that's going to give your special and heavy 20% bonus damage for 15 seconds. It's not like last week with Class Warfare where it gives it to everyone around you, it's just for you. So this is definitely less good, I would say, than last week, but it does have a little bit more uptime in the kind of in-between phases of not just damage. A little easier to proc maybe like during ad clear and stuff like that. So a little bit of a downside, but a little bit of a tiny bit of an upside. I'd say it's more of a downside, but we'll roll with it. Now, as I mentioned last week, Solar subclasses are just in a really good spot in terms of survival and damage anyway. So things like Wells, Blade Barrage, Golden Gun, and especially Pyro Gales on Titan are going to make all of your Solar subclasses extremely strong. Again, they're good for survival, but they're also going to be great for damage with that 25% Solar Surge this week. And obviously, again, Well giving you that 25% damage buff as well, just from being in it. So all 3 classes have some really great options for matching the Surge, and you still got other options. You don't necessarily have to match the Surge with your subclasses, but we are going to go over some weapons that I would highly recommend. Our first weapon we're talking about is Apex Predator. This is free for everybody through Riven's Wishes, so there's no reason for anybody to not have a crafted Apex Predator at this point, and if you don't and you want to go into Pantheon, I'd highly recommend focusing on getting this first. It shouldn't take more than an hour at absolute most doing a couple of those really easy Riven Wishes, but go for Reconstruction and Bait and Switch or Reconstruction Explosive Light, and you're going to be good to go, and you're going to be able to do a ton of damage. Again, like we talked about last week, burst damage is really important for a couple of these encounters, and we'll go over that again in a second. For the longer damage phase of Golgoroth, I'd recommend something like Cataclysmic. Linears tend to have a little bit nicer of ammo economy over a longer phase. Especially with 4th times the charm on Cataclysmic, this is going to draw ammo from thin air and give you a lot more ammo. You also have options like Sleeper or Briar's Contempt as other Solar Linear Fusion Rifle options. Obviously, they're not giving you that extra ammo though, so if you do have Cataclysmic, I'd recommend it. Obviously, this is definitely one that's a little bit harder to get than something like Apex, but Briar is also a raid, linear, sleeper. That's something that everybody can get. And again, you can still go with something like Apex, just like last week we ran GLs a lot of times. You can still run rockets here too, but these are some options as well. I'd also recommend having Parasite for Atrax in particular. It's even better this week because again, now we're on Solar Surge. We were using it last week anyway, but with Solar Surge, it's just doing even more damage. Also, don't forget to have somebody on your team running Gallahorn. Definitely going to want those Wolfpack rounds if you are using rockets that everybody else is using Apex Predators. You're definitely going to want somebody on Galley. And another super easy to get and free to all players weapon at this point is Whisper of the Worm. I'd recommend having this one on hand as well for Oryx. It's going to be a really great option there. Also, really quickly talking about rewards for this week. Once again, a ton of Spoils of Conquest are on offer between completing all the encounters and claiming the triumphs. You'll be getting adepts from every encounter for your first plat completion just like last week as well. Additionally, when completing this week's Pantheon, you'll have the chance to buy Deepstone Crypt and Kingsfall weapons from Arcite, both of which can give you your weekly red border, and you can even buy Harrowed weapons as if you completed Master Oryx here too. My assumption is you'll still need to have unlocked these weapons first in order to buy them, but you can get both the Quillam's Terminus and Zali's Bane Harrowed versions unlocked guaranteed from the triumphs for these first 2 weeks of Pantheon, so you'll at least have some options. The first 4 bosses for this week are all the same as last week, but I'm going to take a quick minute or so to talk about each of these encounters and a few tips that we learned for each encounter after helping over 60 people with their first Platinum Pantheon clears last week. For Golgi, I'd really recommend a Solar class with a Healing Grenade being your Gaze Holders, as this will allow you to have an instant heal in a pinch, and I also run Phoenix Dive along with Well of Radiance myself to technically have 3 Get Out of Jail free cards. If you are a Well Lock, however, I would recommend using your Well to help the team at one of the pools unless you really end up needing it though. Additionally, you have 2 best options for Heavy, a machine gun, which can be used to help clear ads, as well as help take down the orbs when it is not your turn holding the gaze, or potentially even while you're holding the gaze if you're really efficient with it, and as you get more comfortable, or using Tractor Cannon to help keep a consistent debuff on the boss. I found the most success myself with help runs, starting with machine gun and then switching off mid-encounter to tractor cannon if the damage help is needed on the second phase. I even tried running Cenotaph with a trace rifle this week to be the ultimate support, as there are multiple enemies that you can mark, including the unfinishable boss knights, but honestly that's probably more than is necessary, at least for this week, but it's definitely an option to remember and consider. My biggest caretaker tip is something that I talked about in my Do More Damage in Pantheon video, which is paying attention to when you are doing damage. Step 1 to this is to save all of the non-well supers that your team has for the third plate. Step 2 is to get the boss as close to the health gate without going past it on the first plate, and a little bit more on the second plate if needed. And then on the third plate, you want to burst as much damage as you can so that you can set up for the 2 floor. This week there's an additional setup tip, which is to use the second plate to proc your shot caller buff. 3 primary crits will give you that 20% damage buff for 15 seconds, so making sure to proc it on this second plate to then be able to use it for your burst on the third plate is an extremely easy and effective tool to doing more damage. It's important that everyone do this though, because as mentioned earlier, this is a per person buff, unlike Class Warfare from last week. Additionally, I was told that shooting the pastas also can proc this buff, so you may be able to easily get it before the first plate as well, but having it for the final plate is the most important to ensure that we can push the health bar as far as possible. Planets is a very similar idea for damage phase. You really want to try to backload damage the best you can to push the health bar past each individual health gate on each plate. Using the first couple seconds of the plate to proc shot caller before bursting will be beneficial both in terms of burst and overall damage. Also, I would highly recommend running 2 if not 3 solar resists for this encounter. I know a lot of teams struggled with survival here last week, and the fire is a big reason why. Running a healing grenade with your solar subclass of choice is again going to be extremely beneficial for surviving the tornadoes that can spawn on the runner plates as well. These tornadoes will always start in the same corner and make a triangle around your plate, which can be easily avoidable if you know what to look for and are actively looking for it, but there are definitely times where it spawns when you aren't expecting it, and a healing grenade is the difference between life and death. Also note that the Tormentor can be crowd controlled in every way, which means freeze and suspend work as I mentioned last week, but disorienting grenades is also a great way to keep it off of your team while they work on the other adds, as the Tormentor will despawn once damage phase hits anyway, and clearing the rest of the adds is honestly more important towards having an effective damage phase, especially the Scions. Atrax is really just about damage supers and Parasite. Thunder Crash is super crazy good, both Solar Hunter supers are great, Nova Bomb works, 2 arc resists for the snipers, and Atrax is highly recommended here, with a single void resist for the Tormentor. 2 notes I do have though is the first Tormentor that spawns on the bottom team will spawn where they kill the final servitor, so having everyone in position and ready to focus it down quickly is paramount. Additionally, the first Tormentor that will spawn up top, other than the one that can teleport up top from below, will spawn on the side where you did the first damage phase. So you can be ready for it, or more likely just ready to avoid it for now, as your second damage phase will be starting around this time and is more important to focus on first. Finally, make sure to call out when the Tormentor teleports across from top to bottom or vice versa, and this usually happens when the Tormentor is quite low health and maybe even finisherable, but you do want your team to know that the Tormentor is there and be on the lookout for it, so that it doesn't completely sneak up on them. Now let's talk about the new encounter for this week, Oryx. The start of this encounter is pretty much exactly the same, with the knights that spawn on the plates being tankier but still finisherable for Aeons or markable for Cenotaph if needed. Once you start the running and the ogres die, a knight will spawn across the way to try to eat the orb that the ogres drop. Again, this is exactly like normal. However, there will be multiple waves of these knights that come for each orb, with a total of 3 knights spawning in for each corner. These knights seem to spawn as we were getting on each of the plates and forming each of the torn between dimension platforms, but they may have also just been on a timer. Either way, this means that each person needs to be ready to continue to watch their knight spawn throughout the entire phase, and very importantly, call out if and when they become torn, so that a floater can cover for them both on the plate if needed, as well as watching for the knights. The rest of the way to damage phase is normal until the damage phase starts. Here a Tormentor will spawn. You will be in the safety of the immunity bubble though, so you can just ignore him for now, as you'll want to focus on doing damage here anyway. I feel like it's worth it to take the time to shoot 3 primary crits at Oryx here before starting with your Whisper or other heavy here, as this will give you that 20% increased damage from Shot Caller for 15 straight seconds, or maybe more like 12 to 13 due to needing to proc Whispered Breathing first, but the math may say otherwise, but at the very least it does allow you to use your ammo per shot more efficiently. After the damage phase, you're going to want to melt the Tormentor as quick as possible, as it should be kind of moving towards you by this point, as the next and biggest set of changes are coming now. In our run, we never got to see the Thunderdome, but I've been told that there are multiple shades to deal with in there. If you do get the bombs, however, you're going to have the knights spawn on the plates as usual, and the bombs start spawning on each player again as normal. However, the change here is that this phase is infinite and can even just straight up wipe you if you take too long to kill all of the knights. In other words, you have to kill the knights while avoiding the bombs to end the phase. This is going to be a doozy, but my biggest key here is to make sure to communicate which plates knights are dead and which ones still need help. It is a bit tricky on being able to help any given plate, as you don't want to run on top of each other and kill each other, but communication is key here. Also, if anyone does go down, make sure to res them after this phase. You have no shot of getting a res and not ending up killing people. Once this phase is over, the encounter will start back again at the top and run like normal, other than, again, the multiple Light Eater Knights for the second round. Your goal here will definitely be to get a clean 2 phase, so you won't have to worry about the bombs or Thunderdome again, and will be able to keep you well under the plat score timer. And that's all for today. I hope this video was helpful, and I'll be doing helps over on my stream all this week again, so come on by if you want a chance to run, or learn any new tips that we may find across all of our runs this week. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.